Are we
code
doing what
and
is code review or what to do during code review?
Uh-huh.
Both?
yeah,
Okay.
yes.
Then
We can start. We can
we each
kind
have
of
five
start the
minutes.
same way.
Go.
We can start. Well, I was gonna say we start the same way as last time. We kind of define it, and then the what and the why, and then we can kind of go over each other's opinions on it.
Okay.
So go for it.
I went first last time. Justin, it's your turn.
Okay. Am I doing the what and the why?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see if I can find a quick definition. I like a more specific one.
I have one I pulled straight from Wiki. If you want me to.
That's exactly what I just pulled up. Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead. Do your one.
Okay. Well, I copy pasted this from Wiki. It says, "Code review is a systematic examination of computer source code. It is intended to find mistakes overlooked in software development, improving the overall quality of software." So basically, looking over the code and checking for mistakes, and that should, in the end, give you better software. Is the layman's terms of that?
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
So
And something I would add to that is there's 4 types of coding review. There's at least in my research, there's 4 types of coding review that I found, which was you review in like a formal process where everyone on the team gets together and basically reviews the code as a group. Then there's post commit, which is after you check it in or commit it to the source code. Then there's pre commit, which is kind of in the Git world, would be like a pull request. Someone has to review it before it gets merged into the development branch or master branch. And then there's some hybrid code review, which is kind of a combination of some of those where you pick and choose kind of when to do which one.
we're talking about code review outside the context of you've got somebody who's new to programming or new to the project. We're not talking about using code review as a training exercise. We're using it as code cleanliness. Like you could use code review in both scenarios, but we're just focusing on the latter scenario where we're focusing on let's keep this project clean. Right?
And for me, I think it includes both. I don't think we leave one out because I think you get that the teaching new or less experienced developers by doing code review.
Yeah. I'm not saying you don't. I'm just framing the conversation we're going to have.
Yeah. Well, in my notes, it was kind of it was a key point. Basically, it's one of the benefits of code review is you get to mentor people. So like it's not completely useful for a junior developer to code review a senior developer's code check-in. I think it's beneficial to the junior developer to look and see how this senior developers attacked a problem and came up with a solution. And it's a chance for them to ask questions and be like, "Hey, why'd you do it that way? I would have never thought to do it that way." You know.
But you think that happens in the code review? Because I feel like a junior developer is going to have those experiences through the process of going through whatever section of code he's working on at the time. He's going to see the way things have already been taken care of, and then when a senior developer reviews his, and then says, "Hey, you could have done it this way or that way." They're kind of learning after the fact, but they're getting
you learn both ways
while they're writing.
Yeah, you learn both ways, but I think, I think you learn both ways on being the reviewer and being the reviewee.
That makes sense.
Yeah. All right, so we do want to go over the why now. We kind of already touched on it.
Okay.
You can do this one, Justin, since I stole your what.
Yes, you stole my what. Well, we went over why a little, but realistically, why is so that senior developers can give tips and maybe a better understanding of how to solve a certain problem. This is after the fact, but maybe point them in a different direction than what they originally coded. It could also be. I had another one, and I literally just forgot it. being able to spot maybe errors that they did initially spot when they wrote the code, or a different flow pattern that they hadn't thought about, different use cases they hadn't thought about. Just kind of
So like spotting bugs basically before
they spotting get to bugs, or you can consider it bugs, but just oversights.
Right.
Yeah. I'd read a few lines that were saying some other reasons for doing code review is watch, as the reviewer, watch for really confusing code and really obfuscated code. It might be a sign that like you've got something potentially malicious going on. Like if you've got an open source or a public repo and somebody puts in a pull request that you can't parse, I mean, I feel like you could parse this, but maybe they're trying to put a crypto miner in your code. So checking for malicious code.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never even thought of that. That was, I think whenever I approached this, researching this, I kind of approached it from the mindset of how it applies to our team. That's something that wouldn't apply in our team and most private small teams. I mean, I guess it kind of could.
Yeah, if you got a new guy.
Maybe someone is malicious and wants to put in some kind of backdoor and
or they're about to quit. And so their last check in, they're like, I'll teach them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point though.
And then more along Justin's point, where you're looking for bugs and just different ways to do things, looking for security concerns that aren't maybe considered when you're implementing like the functional requirements. So you've got the functional requirements working, there's no quote bugs, but maybe you've allowed for the code being reviewed allows for SQL injection or cross-site request forgery. Those are things that you might miss if you're not used to coding for them.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't be in the standard, the coding standard. Like, don't allow SQL injection. That's just
right. That's practice. Too specific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys don't allow SQL injection here?
Well, my last job did.
My last job, it was everywhere.
Yeah. So I have a few that I'll add. So I think a big benefit is not one person knows a specific part of the code. Not one person isn't going to be the owner of a siloed part of the code. Basically, there isn't a critical path. So if team member X gets hit by a bus on Monday, on Tuesday, we can still continue to develop the product and like nothing happened.
No remorse. The next day, everybody's back to work.
No remorse. We just continue to work. Yeah.
And nothing will have happened. Perfect.
We'll put a card in Trello. Learn what Justin did.
So yeah, that's one benefit. The other one would be it makes estimates stronger. So like in an agile type of environment or oriented team, you would be able to estimate user stories better because more developers, QA people, I guess not QA people, more developers would know about different parts of the code and know what it would take, the caveats that might come up when doing or implementing a user story, so they can more confidently and more reliably estimate how long it might take to do a certain user story.
If I can give an example of that, I would say if you're messing with all this font stuff, like downloading fonts to players and devices and messing with the font library, that's something recent and specific that, Justin, I don't know if you did much with the font stuff, but you'd have to go learn all that from scratch versus
I did
Ziva or Tim.
And then took it back out. That's how much I did.
So you know none of the code basically for fonts.
I know what fonts go in there. That's about it.
Yeah. So
you could code it, but you would be able to estimate new work.
There's gonna be a big ramp up if you ever have to go in to fix a bug or add a feature to fonts.
Yeah, if I got a bug assigned to me, I'd be a little nervous at first.
You're gonna have to go ask either me, Siva, or Tim, and if all three of us get hit by a bus, you're out of luck.
Omar, you started by saying that it would help us estimate new stuff. But then we also just said it would reduce the time it takes to code stuff. So if you were well versed in font library stuff, you wouldn't have to go ramp up. You could just almost start coding immediately.
Yeah.
And so you'd be better at what was
It
the
would
word
cut down
we
the
used?
time of implementation, basically. Yeah. Ramp up time.
If you're looking at code review from not necessarily immediately after check-in, but I think there was another one of the four you had said was kind of a full functional. This is the entire feature implementation. If you think of code review from that aspect, kind of like a lunch and learn, like we did, where you just talk the entire subject and point to specifically to code. That's a really nice feature to be able to sit down as a group instead of just one-on-one code review, but do an entire feature discussion. Because if you do a code review one-on-one, one person gets a little more knowledge. If you're working on bugs or if you're working on like a really small change, only one, maybe only one person needs to see that. But in a full feature development where one person might be checking it over and over again, but once the entire feature's done, everybody will have just 1% of the feature, and a full review might be necessary.
Yeah, so that's the one of the points that came up in my research was wow, I just forgot it.
Edit.
Geez, what was it? About what were you saying? Completely blank.
Full feature changes, and maybe one individual is doing the code review for most of that feature.
Oh, that's what it was. Okay, got it. Came to me. So, as if you have, or a lot of people suggested having more than one code reviewer.
Mhm.
Not only does that cut down on the bottleneck, so you're not waiting on one person to say this code check-in is good, move along. You have two people looking at it one person can possibly say, yeah, it's good, go ahead, while the other one might be busy or something. And then you have multiple people looking at one code check-in.
Oh, so it's in that case, it's the first person who can get to it?
Yeah, kind of. And so the suggestion was not to go more than two. Like it was very like basically two or one. Don't go over two because then you have too many cooks in the kitchen, basically, and it can be less productive. Yeah. Okay. So another one of the whys that I had, the last one I have, is peer pressure. So peer pressure actually is good in this instance. So when you're writing the code, another developer is going to be looking at your code, so you kind of have this pressure to look things over a little bit more carefully, be a little bit scrutinize your code a little bit more right before you check in, or remember to run the unit test before you check it in, that kind of thing. So the peer pressure in this instance is a good thing and a benefit.
Okay, that makes sense. Where's the threshold for? Let's say you're in a position like us, where I guess we technically have two senior developers out of all of us, and so the bottleneck on code review. Granted, we don't do yet, but that bottleneck on code review could be pretty heavy when we're close to release in moments like this past week or past 2 weeks, where we're close to release and you end up getting a senior developer doing almost more code review than feature work.
Yeah, so almost the rest of my notes are questions.
Okay.
And that's one of the big questions that I actually asked in 3 or 4 different ways. Is when should it happen? How do you choose who does it? How long do you wait to say, hey, get this done? How much time do you give them basically to
Where's
say
the priority on a rejected code review versus a new bug? Is that what you're
right?
Okay.
Right, and I think the win is kind of a big thing too, and on top of that is what should code review like? Do you code review everything, or do you only code review user stories after they're fully implemented, big features. You code review every single bug.
I feel like the bigger the
Like, where do you
scope
set
of
the
the
line?
feature or the requirement, you might want to do code review almost halfway through you're done with the requirement. So if it's a massive feature, you don't want to completely finish it and then do a code review with somebody and then they say, "No, this is fundamentally wrong." Like go change half the stuff you wrote.
But if you're halfway done with a massive feature, if you're halfway done or you're fully done, making a change to the base implementation is changing the entire feature. So to me, the bigger the feature, the more often you're code reviewing.
Yeah.
If it's a bug fix, maybe nobody needs to look at it, or maybe one person can just go, "Yep, cool, that probably fixes the bug." But if it's a huge feature, almost every like block you're checking in should have a review for multiple reasons. One, that way you're not, if it's a massive feature like what I'm working on right now, halfway through is like that could be like 2,000 lines of code, and that's a ton to have to wait to code review all at once. And so doing that, I make a change to one file. Okay, let's talk about this and what and why this is changing and which direction I'm going with this, and kind of taking it, a building block at a time.
And that would give the reviewer some time to like sit on things that you just showed that person, and they keep getting their memory refreshed every time you do this review. Like, oh, I remember Justin, you did this block last time. Okay, and that's cohesive with this new block that you're showing me today.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me.
Yeah, I said halfway just kind of arbitrarily.
Sure,
I'm just saying incremental code review so you can course correct.
in my mind, it's the bigger the feature, the more often.
Yeah, I think for our team specifically, maybe a hybrid approach is the better way. It's kind of case by case because not every work item or user story is the same. Some are these huge user stories that are, and there's different types of big user stories. There's like big ones that are brand new that are like going to be almost completely brand new code.
Yeah.
There's some that are really big that actually aren't new. They're just modifying a lot of different things. They're touching a lot of different things. And I think each one of those needs to be handled differently. I guess with the more concrete example, say the one where it's brand new code, that one you might want to check in be better about checking in small chunks of code because you can kind of get away with that. You can kind of scaffold out like what you're going to do at a high level and not actually do the implementation details, kind of do like some interfaces and some classes, your design is up front, and then have that code reviewed and then continue to work on it, actually do some more implementation details. Whereas on a one that like touches more existing code and isn't a brand new feature, but it's like modifying the way things work, maybe in that one you're going to have to kind of wait for all of it to get done because you can't really scaffold it. Or
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and one like what I'm working on, there's almost, I guess I could check it in blocks, and I guess it kind of it almost forces you to design the new changes, especially if you're checking it in blocks, so that each section can work independently. So if any one change doesn't break a different section, whereas like you said, when you're doing a whole new feature, you can see the scaffolding, and it's forcing you to make incremental check-ins on a regular basis, and you don't end up with just all of a sudden here's 5,000.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of it's not really it might be a problem just with our developers that we don't like to check in things incrementally, but I think it's more of the source control and the tools that we're using, because in TFS and the way our application lifecycle works, it's not as easy for someone that's working on a big feature to check in incrementally, because each time you check in, that change set gets put into a test build if someone else is ready for a test build and you aren't ready for it. So you have to be like really sure that your small check-in's not going to break the build for someone else or break the test build for someone else. Right. Whereas once we switch to Git and we do kind of feature branching, you can have a feature branch where you're incrementally checking in. You can have, I can say like, hey, Justin, check out my feature branch. Can you do a code review? You could actually do a build off that feature branch, and someone working off the development branch or doing a test build off the development branch, it has no effect on them.
That'll be nice.
And I can still stay up to date with the development branch. Like say someone else is working on a bug fix or a feature and they finish before I finish, I can pull in their changes into my branch and I'm still up to date with the development branch, but I'm not breaking the development branch.
That's nice. That'll be nice.
Yeah. Or not introducing bugs that aren't completely fleshed out or done. So I think in our case it's due to the tools and our source control.
Yeah, and that we don't have code reviews, so
that too.
I put some of my automation stuff in Git recently, and what was that?
I was trying to turn on a lamp, but it's like really bright.
I'm really looking forward to doing pull requests and forking and branching with this project and other guys on the QA team.
Yeah, I think once we move to Git, it'll be a lot of this will be a lot easier to implement and start doing.
Do you have an opinion on the specific opinion that you don't even know yet? So you have a repo in Git. You're the owner / maintainer. There's an option to where you can allow pull requests to be merged based on like a democratic process where like you require 1 or 2 or X people to approve the pull request versus only you, the owner / maintainer, can approve the pull request. In your guys' like development TDS context, would you choose one or the other?
Well, I think it would be specific to each branch. Thinking off the top of my head, I would actually use both. I'd say on master, you would have a handful of people, say the manager or 1 or 2 people basically that have control on merging things into the master branch. And then the development branch, it could be more of a democratic type of, once you have 2 code reviews or 1 code review, merge it in. It's good. So and then on the feature branches, whoever creates the feature branch owns that, and they can do whatever they want with it.
Okay, but then the pull request back into the dev branch still needs those 2 reviewers.
Or whatever you specify, whatever your process is. In our case, probably 1 would be sufficient.
Okay. So do you kind of see it in this Git scenario, us ever having like a backlog of pull requests into the dev branch?
Yeah, that's that bottleneck I was talking about, and I think Justin brought up. That's a really big problem with code review, and something that I think will make the acceptance of code review. And maybe Justin, this is probably what hasn't made it easy to get code review up until this point, is because code review does take some time. It like waiting for someone to review the code before you can actually merge it into a branch or go forward with it and do a test build.
Yeah, I think now that I kind of, I guess, hear somebody else ask my question, another thing that I read today was the use of automated code review. I think we talked a little bit about it last week, in the software that kind of does some initial checks for you, and that helps reduce, the developer's time reviewing by a significant portion. So it would be a help to that would be automating the process as much as possible.
Yeah, you're running that before you enter the pull request, right?
I would think as you like make the check-in, as you commit the first time, I think it would run. I don't know how it would work on a Git server. On TFS, I just think is, as soon as you make the check-in, you would probably run it and then reject it immediately.
Okay. I think it might be a specific to team, because like I said, there's those different types of code reviews. Like, when do you do the code review? Before you commit, after you commit, or after you commit it and it's in a build and someone's actually tested it. So there's different types, and then there's a hybrid. I think we'd fall into the hybrid where it's kind of a case by case thing.
Another reason we don't have code review is another thing we talked about last week, which is the legacy code is so ridiculously big. Anything we try to implement for a standard would be, a pin drop in a well. So we'd have to do it on one of the newer projects. And even then, it's kind of after the fact. So, we're retrofitting it a little.
Yeah. So this is a kind of a cool little note that I found in one of the articles. I'll just read it. There was a study documented the number of hours it took to fix a bug that is found at different phases in the application lifecycle. They showed that a bug introduced at the coding phase but discovered in production took an average of 14.8 hours to fix, but if found during the coding stage, it took 3.5 hours. So I thought that was a pretty cool study that basically showed how coding review actually saves time in the long run. So basically, without the coding review process, you have the possibility of bugs to get through that might make it through the QA testing that won't be found in QA because it's kind of one of those weird bugs that you can't really just make happen in your normal testing. But in code review, someone could probably spot it, or might be able to spot it a little bit easier, and then it's a lot easier to fix in the development stage versus out in production. Then you have to, even if the actual developer who originally wrote the code where the bug exists goes and look at it, they have to do a revamp basically and relearn what they wrote and say, and why did I do that? Versus when they just freshly wrote it, they're like, oh, I know exactly what I was doing.
Not to mention the amount of, extra layers of other people's code that have gone in by the time a production build is caught. What you wrote may not even be the same.
Yeah, exactly.
I can see that. I wasn't sure how 14 hours made sense. And you have to cut a maintenance build, and maybe you have to go update a production server.
Yeah. It just keeps stacking on. That number could probably be even bigger in some cases.
And it takes 2 years for the customer to upgrade to the new version.
So you don't find it. Yeah. So you don't find it until that version of .NET is actually out of date. So then you have to go update that. Yeah.
It'd be interesting to run those numbers on our projects.
Nope.
Nope. I found an article online. Looks like a blog post by SmartBear. I used to use some of their automated testing software. They give some tips for good code review. If you don't mind, I'll just share a few. So one of them, I'll give you the link. Don't review more than 400 lines of code in a single session, and don't review for more than an hour at a time, because at some point your brain just turns off. The last lines of code you're reviewing are not going to be as well reviewed as those first few lines of code.
I feel like just to stop you there, I feel like if you're reviewing something that takes an hour to review,
you should be able to know right away, that's way too much spread out code, because it's probably not all in one file. It's probably multiple files. And
my first response is, oh, this should have been multiple check-ins. What are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not going to look at that, basically.
Yeah, that's like 600 lines.
I click on the link and see how much the diff on it, and be like, nope.
Be like, looks good. Send it.
Yeah. I think that goes with one of the notes that we had earlier, which was try to keep your check-ins smaller, more succinct, and more frequently.
Right, but small
But,
can always
but
be
we can't
more.
do that very well right now, or our tools don't allow us to do that very easily right now.
Some other items are use checklists. So maybe things you frequently find during code reviews that are not in the standard. So SQL injection, etc. The stuff we went over before. The obfuscation stuff. I mean, you're not always going to look for that, but it's nice to just see the one bullet and you just spend 5 seconds looking at the bullet, reminding yourself of it.
I think that's where the coding standard comes in handy too.
Yeah. Comment the code before review. So I guess Omar and Justin, if you guys are working on this large project, if you're not already adding comments while you're coding, and it's 2 days later since you've written the code, I could go back and try and add comments before you do the review, so you're not spending or wasting time for you as the author trying to remember what the code does.
Yeah.
Unless you've got comments established in your standard.
Which makes sense, and that's kind of how I feel about some of these points. Is that if you're running into some of these issues, your standards, you probably should update your coding standard.
Yeah.
Capture this so that you don't continue to see these problems.
Well, that's probably a good point to have it on the code review checklist, though, so that you can say, hey, you need to say why you did that because it's not very clear. So once you start doing that to a developer that continues to do that to a developer that isn't commenting very well or isn't making code clearly enough, eventually the hope is that with code review, they'll get better about it and start. So I think that's good to have on a checklist.
It could be as simple as just saying review. If you implement contracts, just go back and say review your contracts, because sometimes you'll write a contract, write code, find a defect, fix the code, but not go back and update the contract or the comments.
Yeah, something I'll add on that is I think not only should you have good comments, but good commit messages. I think for the most part, I think our team does pretty well with commit messages. It was just one of the things that came up in the articles was make sure to write good commit messages. Like example of a bad one is make compile again versus add XYZ dependency to fix the WT compilation. So kind of say what you're doing instead of saying what the result's going to be.
I am confident there's a work item checked in to TFS where the check-in message was make compile again.
Yeah, that's why I said for the most part we're good about this, but there's definitely plenty of check-ins I see that come through with those.
Matter of fact, I think I checked it in that said Omar had a problem with this, so I went and fixed it. And then you commented to me about the fact that I had said that.
I did. I had one more. I can't remember. It went along with the commit messages. It was about how to. Oh no! It was about giving code review or giving like when you're giving, I guess, feedback to the reviewee. You should give the feedback in a suggestion form, not a do this or make a decision on it. You should say like, you should phrase it in a suggestive way. Suggestion.
I'm going to deny this, and what I think you should do is go make a few changes.
Yeah.
But if you send it back without these changes, I'm going to deny it again.
So, and a little bit more background on that is you want to give your developers the freedom to choose. Like you don't want to tie your developers' hands too much. You want to give them
freedom.
Yeah, some freedom basically. That doesn't mean like if they're breaking rules in the coding standard, those should be suggestions. Those should be hard. Like no, there's a coding standard, abide by it. But I'm talking more of the you should refactor this, or you should think about using a factory here, or a singleton, or don't use a singleton, things like that, where it's kind of more subjective. Like, give those in the form of a suggestion.
You're still giving them the opportunity to go learn if you're suggesting it instead of saying, "Oh, this line right here should be, or this should be for each. Why are you doing it this way?"
Yeah,
So
and I
you're
think
like-
Jack said it right. Like, it's the freedom. Like, you want to give your developers freedom. You don't because that it just cultivates a good culture where you bring in better developers. Which we don't have a big problem with that because we don't bring in new developers that often. But you're going to push away good developers if you tie their hands and say, like, you have to do this if a code reviewer told you to do this. So, yeah.
If you were doing a peer review, like you're both developers at the same level, same grade, and you can't decide, you can't agree on whether, so if Omar, if you're the author and Justin's a reviewer, Justin, you say, no, I'm not going to accept this. And Omar says, no, this is objectively the best way to do it. Would you guys, if you're implementing this code review process, would you rather force yourselves to come to a compromise or resolution, or would you want to have a third party arbitrate?
Third party. I think this is where the secondary like person on the list would come in. If we both just can't come, like if Omar just hates the way I code, and Omar's constantly wrong about it, then we'll just tell somebody else have somebody else tell Omar how wrong he is about it, and then it's fine.
Your comment made me forget what I was going to say.
Okay, the question is, would you rather force yourselves to come to a solution or a compromise, or arbitrate?
I would say two things to this. The first one would be my note or comment before this was the give him a suggestions. So if I don't like Justin's coding or whatever, I think he should do it a different way, I would say it in the form of a suggestion. And then that wouldn't actually fail the code review. It would just be a suggestion. Then Justin can take that and be like, nah, I think Omar's crazy. I'm not going to do that. Or be like, more likely. Or he'd actually change it and actually check it in that way.
So in your scenario, Justin still has the authority to merge his code.
Yes, that's that freedom I'm talking about. I think he has the freedom to choose whether or not to do it, unless it's in the coding standard and I can specifically point to like a rule saying like you're breaking this rule, and that's why I said the rules in the coding standard shouldn't be opinionated and they shouldn't have subjective language in it, so that you don't come across these problems. And then the second thing on this is, I think if you are coming to a disagreement with someone, you should take two steps back and think like, why am I coming to the disagreement? There must be something, or maybe not there must be something wrong, but maybe take two looks at your code and be like, does the other person have a good reason to change this? So be open-minded about it, basically. That's what I was trying to say.
I know I'll turn down some advice, or it may appear that I turn down advice when I'm not confident in what this other person's suggesting. Like, okay, I understand those words, but I don't know what the alternative actually is, so I'm just going to kind of sit on my hands for a while.
Yeah, I feel like giving the person who's being reviewed, I feel like they should almost not ever have the final say. I mean, I get they wrote the code, that's fine, but if they and their reviewer disagree, it shouldn't still be to their prerogative to go ahead and check it in anyways. I feel like you should definitely find someone else who would just be the tiebreaker, and if that person sides with the person being reviewed, okay. But they should never be able to just shake off what was suggested to them and say, nah, I still like the way I did it.
Yeah. I think so. I got two comments on this. One, if it's something that's big enough and happens often, like maybe the first time, let it slide, second time, say, is this some kind of coding standard that we could put up and like maybe amend it to our coding standard so that I can point to an actual rule and that would be something you bring up to like a meeting or something to get added to the coding standard. And I would try to avoid like getting a third party in this just because that's wasting other people's time, like to pull in another person. And I think and then my second point to this is this might be where having two code reviewers on every code review is a good thing to do.
I feel like
Like
your
maybe have
statements
a fresh set of eyes that just look at it without hearing what the first code reviewer said. Like just say, "Hey, go code review this," but not tell them what you saw wrong with the code. Just have them look at it, and if they find something else and don't even see what you saw, I think that kind of says yeah, you don't want to bias them basically.
I guess you'd want to make sure you don't have a super type A personality doing code review. Like, oh, I wouldn't do what Omar's doing in that way, so I'm going to say no. So I guess making sure that the reviewer does give people freedom. So not just the organization giving your developers freedom, but the actual individual reviewers giving the developers freedom.
Yeah, for an organization or developers that have never done code review, it's going to take some practice. Like it's going to happen inevitably. People are going to try to force their coding style or their opinion on developers, and I think that's where that freedom comes into play. Um, but I think as it evolves, and then you start to find like that's something that we could add to the coding standard, or um, once you see like say you have two code reviews on a piece of code, and you see that the other reviewer didn't see what you saw, maybe you start to think twice about that. Be like, is that a stylistic thing that I was commenting on, or was that, or is the other person just missing what I'm looking at or missing what I'm seeing? So I think the process just evolves as we go.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that I actually have a list of things to avoid, and one of the first one was don't get emotional. Don't get emotional with your code reviews. Don't focus blame, so
Be on the checklist, the very first item.
don't get emotional.
Yeah, as the reviewer, just remind yourself.
Don't get emotional. Yeah, it's important to have on the checklist. And then the next one is don't focus blame, so don't try to like blame the person, or don't even think about the author. Just focus on the actual code that you're looking at. Um, don't redesign the code. So like if you see code and you'd rather space some code out or organize the code differently, say you're looking at a function, it was just one function that they added, don't try to reorganize the way the function's laid out unless it's fundamentally wrong or fundamentally have some problem, or you can things going to go wrong with it, or it's open to prone to errors or bugs. Um, this kind of goes along with along the same line as don't force your opinion on other people, but don't judge how you would have done it. So don't try to say I would have done it this way. You're more there to say um, I would suggest using this design pattern, or you're missing a null check here. So don't try to say what you would have done in that situation, really. I think that's all I have on the avoiding one things to avoid.
So on your second item, you'd said don't like rewrite the code or don't change what it. What was your second item?
Don't focus blame.
The third one.
Don't redesign the code.
That one. So
Okay.
are you suggesting that the reviewer would actually go modify the code?
Oh no. I'm saying like their suggestions are so they're suggesting so much that it's basically redesigning the code.
Okay.
Like they're saying, I can't think of an example and talk about it because to talk about a good example, there'd be a lot of different things you would have to change. And
So don't push a file to the player, pull the file. Like does the same thing, but you're fundamentally changing how it works.
More
no,
like
that's not redesigning.
more like if you used, you use some kind of array to hold some values here, and like I don't even know how to. I see why it's a difficult thing to describe, but essentially,
it's kind of like a visual thing you have to
Yeah.
do. Like you would have to. It's like kind of like changing the layout of say you have this function and you initialize the variable equal to null, and then later on you new up an object and assign it to that variable. You don't want to suggest like, hey, new it up here and I don't know. You don't want to change the way change the way it looks without actually adding value or
I see what you're saying now.
making a suggestion that is going to actually improve the code.
Because if you
So,
get
like-
into like this, I would have done.
Yeah,
Because like that would be a big snowball effect. Because like, oh, I would have made a change here. Well, you know what? I actually would have done this over here, and then by the end, you're rewriting the entire functionality just because you would have done it differently.
right. And there's cases where you would want to like suggest those types of changes, like the example I threw out where you have a variable initialized at the top to null, then you new up an object later on. Say maybe in the function you're looking at, if you don't new it up at the top, the caller of the function is expecting a non-null object. And so if there's a possibility for exception before you new it up, then there's a possibility for that object to get returned as null. So hopefully you followed that. Like that's hard to explain without giving you a visual of it. But that type of suggestion would be good versus just suggesting that without having a valid reason for it. Like just saying it looks better that way or I would have done it this way. So basically have a backup while you're suggesting something.
Make sure you're actually solving.
That's probably
the
a
problem.
better way. Yeah, that's probably a better way to put it. Back up what you're suggesting. Have valid,
Don't find
valid
solutions to problems
reasons.
that don't exist.
Yeah,
I'll fix what ain't broke.
exactly. Yeah, and just another thing I'll reiterate because it came up at the bottom of my notes is to keep in mind that code review isn't just a senior team member reviewing junior team members, making sure they don't introduce bad code. It's all developers reviewing all developers, no matter what stage they are. So junior developers reviewing senior developers, and senior developers reviewing junior, and senior reviewing senior, etc.
I could see a reason not to ever let juniors review seniors.
Why is
But
that?
that's the only case. I mean, depending how junior you are. I mean, do you consider junior like not somebody who's new, or junior is
Well,
anybody?
Take for example someone straight out of college that's never been in a real world.
Yeah, I wouldn't let
software
someone
job.
like that. I wouldn't want someone like that reviewing senior code, especially for a lot of reasons. I can see how it'd be beneficial to them to look at it.
Well, if you have 2 reviewers for each check-in
Yeah.
or merge, then one of them could be a junior, and then make sure you have a more senior on as the other reviewer.
That's fine, but never solely the new hire, because they're not going to be as familiar. it may not be a season, so there may be errors right in front of their face that they don't recognize because they're so not used to looking at it. Like I can see a lot of reasons why the
I
greener
could
they
see that.
are, the
So
more they're not. I mean, I don't want to say they're not doing any good, but they could be doing. There could be people doing a better job with the amount of time taken to do the review.
yeah, I think so. One of the lists like that were kind of a checklist of code review things or items of code review left this off and said have someone qualified review the code.
There you go.
Where I feel like that takes away one of the benefits of code review. Like I think you want junior developers looking at senior developers code, but I guess
They'll be
adding on a senior, like having 2 code reviews, I guess solves that problem.
I mean, they're still in the code base, right? If I still someone straight out of college and I tell them to go write some,
Yeah, but if you aren't actively set as a reviewer and you see a commit, I mean, you could possibly see multiple commits per day. You're not going to go look at every single one. I mean, sometimes they just look like noise unless you're specifically called out and say review this code. You're not really going to go look at it.
Okay. I would put like some kind of. It could be arbitrary, but not 6 months, 9 months. You have to have been in the system working on the software for at least some amount of time to qualify as a reviewer.
Yeah. I guess a good way to put it would be have at least one. What was the word we used? Qualified reviewer on the review.
Sure. Or one qualified reviewer to actually push it through. And then somebody, you could have somebody who's new on every review. That way they're constantly getting exposed to it. They may not be happy, but
yeah. One of the questions I had was, how do you come up with reviewers? Like, how do you pick who's going to review my code? I guess we just have a random name generator or something.
Roll the dice, yeah. Or you have.
You don't want to
you have a recurring list, and every time it checks off that, you just who's next on the list. Okay, it's that person.
Yeah, you don't want to have like developers choose, because then there's probably going to be one developer that's easier on everyone else that just like lets everything go by, so they're just going to continually send stuff to them, versus someone that actually looks and gives suggestions, and they're like, nah, I don't want to send my code to them. Yeah, does anyone have anything else in their notes or they want to talk about?
Nope.
My notes were fairly short on this topic.
Yeah, mine were just a bunch of questions, and I think we covered a lot of them in just talking about it.
So I guess I have a question for you guys. What is, if you're not already, what would be preventing you from doing code review on your next check-in?
Nothing. I did code review on Omar's check-in today just for S's and G's.
Yeah, my code was perfect, so whatever.
Omar, did you ask him, or did Justin you just offer?
Oh no, he asked me. I'm not gonna waste my time if he doesn't want me to do it. Come on now.
Okay.
I actually, so I have notifications set up on TFS for every single check-in to the code base. Yeah, I mean, I have it filtering to its own specific folder, so if I don't want to be annoyed by it, I won't see it. But I still go there and like look, and like if it's a like Android or the VCE project, I actually go and do a high level look at it, and then if it interests me, I actually go and look at the change set and look at all the files and diffs and everything. And actually last week, Tim did a check-in, and it was like 3 lines, and it was just a little try catch around something to make sure.
I know what that one is.
Yeah, and basically whenever he put that try catch, he copied a variable or something, some kind of copy paste error basically, and he was incrementing a variable twice.
Oh, I don't know that one then.
And I just like sent him an email real quick, and it was just like, hey, you're incrementing a variable twice in this check-in. I was like, oh, cool, thanks. So there you go. Saved like a couple hours of testing, and probably
the life
saved a
today.
whole day or two of testing because the how quickly we get test builds out is kind of long. He was able to fix that before they did a test build.
Kind of did that with one of Siva's check-ins a long time ago. So Joe had added a method, and then outside the method, there's a variable that holds a value. And then Siva had added a second method, and he was using the same variable to hold a value for that method. And I would have never caught that bug in that two methods are using the same value, but they're doing completely different things. The only way I caught that was by looking at his change set.
Yeah. So I think same in my instance. Like I don't think it would have caused any errors or bugs that you would have caught in QA. Compilation went through fine. I mean, code was perfectly fine. It's just the count would have been twice as much or however many times more than it should have been. And I don't know where that value was being used, but say that value was reused somewhere else or used further down the line in the code, it could have caused other bugs. And yeah.
Imagine all those little breaks that are in the code base now that were never caught, and we're never going to catch them.
You know?
Depending on which project you're talking about. On legacy code, I think the bubble gum and the duct tape is what holds it together. So,
Yep.
that little guy, don't worry about that little guy.